A single glass of water. That's all she asked for. It's a request so simple, so fundamental, it should be automatic at 35,000 feet. But on Aura Airlines, Flight 88 from New York to Paris, that simple request was denied. The passenger was Dr. Emma Grace, a world-renowned historian on her way to deliver a keynote speech. The flight attendant saw her not as a respected academic, but as someone unworthy of a basic courtesy. What that flight attendant didn't know was that the quiet, unassuming man in the next seat, the one she also dismissed, wasn't just another passenger. He was Robert Mercer, a man who didn't just collect art or yachts, he collected companies, and he had just witnessed the one thing that could turn a multi-billion-dollar business into his next personal project, a profound injustice. This is the story of how a single glass of water led to a corporate earthquake that shook an entire industry to its core. The cabin of the Boeing 777 was a pressurized world of its own, a sterile tube hurtling through the stratosphere. For Dr. Emma Grace, it was a familiar limbo. She was a woman who lived between continents her life, a curated collection of conference halls, university archives, and the hushed, recycled air of transatlantic flights. At 52, she wore her accolades not like a crown, but like a well-tailored coat, with quiet confidence and understated elegance. Her latest book on the economic underpinnings of the French Revolution had just been nominated for a prestigious prize, and she was on her way to the Sorbonne in Paris to deliver a lecture that felt like a culmination of her life's work. She had settled into her premium economy seat, 24B, an aisle seat she'd paid a little extra for, to give her long legs some room. She'd spent the first hour of the flight reviewing her notes, the familiar thrill of intellectual preparation settling her nerves. The dinner service had come and gone, a mediocre chicken dish she'd barely touched. Now, a few hours into the flight, the cabin was dark, punctuated by the blue glow of screens and the occasional soft light from a reading lamp. A persistent dry tickle had begun to form in the back of her throat. She looked around for a flight attendant. A woman with blonde hair, pulled into a severe bun, her name tag reading Bethany, was moving down the cabin, collecting stray cups with a look of bored impatience. Emma waited until she was a few rows away and pressed her call button. The small light above her head illuminated. Bethany continued her slow progress, her eyes deliberately avoiding the lit call buttons. She passed Emma's row, then another. Emma, a patient woman by nature, waited another minute before gently pressing the button again. This time, Bethany stopped, turned, and walked back with the heavy-footed sigh of someone deeply inconvenienced. "Yes," she said, her voice clipped. She didn't look at Emma's face, but somewhere around her shoulder. "I'm so sorry to bother you," Emma began, her voice soft but clear. "Could I please have a glass of water when you have a moment?" Bethany's eyes, a flat, disinterested blue, finally met hers. A flicker of something assessment dismissal passed through them. "The beverage service is over," she stated, as if that were a law of physics. "We'll be coming through with a final water service about an hour before landing." "I understand," Emma said, still polite. "I just have a bit of a dry throat. A small bottle or even just a cup would be wonderful if it's not too much trouble." Bethany's lips thinned into a bloodless line. "Like I said, the service is over. I can't be running back and forth to the galley for individual requests. It disturbs the other passengers." She gestured vaguely at the sleeping cabin. The excuse was so flimsy, so transparently false, that Emma felt a familiar, weary pang. It was the same exhaustion she felt when a store clerk followed her through the aisles, or when a conference attendee expressed surprise at her articulate command of her own subject. It was the low-grade, persistent friction of navigating the world in her skin. "I see," Emma said, her voice losing none of its composure. It's just that the gentleman in the row ahead of me asked for a coffee not 10 minutes ago, and your colleague was happy to oblige." The observation hung in the air clean and sharp. Bethany's face tightened. The pretense of procedure was gone, replaced by a raw defensive hostility. "First-class passengers have different service standards." She snapped her voice a low hiss. "He's not in first class," a quiet voice said from the seat next to Emma. Both women turned to look at the man in 24C. He was in his late 60s, dressed in a simple grey cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He had a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose and a worn paperback copy of a Gibbon history text in his lap. He hadn't said a word the entire flight, seemingly absorbed in his book. Now he looked directly at Bethany, his gaze calm but unyielding. "That man is in seat 21G, the man continued, his voice even. "That's the same cabin class as this one. I watched your colleague bring him a fresh coffee from the galley. This lady has only asked for a glass of water." Bethany's mask of professional detachment crumbled completely. Her face flushed a blotchy red. She was being contradicted, challenged, and by the look of it by some quiet old man who had no idea who she was or the authority she held in this small metal world. "So this is a matter between me and the passenger," she spat, turning her glare on him. "And I am not going to open the service carts again." "It is against policy." She turned her back on them both, a picture of righteous indignation, and marched toward the back of the plane. Emma let out a slow, quiet breath. The humiliation was a hot flush on her cheeks. It wasn't about the water anymore. It was never just about the water. It was about the casual, cruel exercise of petty power, about being made to feel small and undeserving. She turned to the man beside her. "Thank you for speaking up," she said softly. "You really didn't have to." He closed his book, marking his page with a finger. His eyes were a startlingly clear blue, crinkled at the corners. They held a look of profound disappointment, not just at the situation, but at something larger. "Some things are not matters of policy," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "They are matters of basic human decency. My name is Bob, by the way." "Emma," she replied, offering a small, grateful smile. "And it seems neither of us will be getting a drink any time soon." "Oh, I wouldn't say that," Bob said, a strange, thoughtful look crossing his face. He unbuckled his seatbelt. "You stay right there, Emma. I'll be right back." He stood up, a man of average height, but with an air of immense solidity, and began to walk toward the front of the plane, not the back where Bethany had gone, but toward the curtain that separated them from the rarefied air of first class. Robert Bob Mercer didn't walk with the tentative shuffle of a passenger in a darkened cabin. He moved with a quiet, certain purpose, his steps steady on the carpeted aisle. He ignored the rear galley entirely and proceeded directly to the front, where the senior flight crew managed the premium cabins. He slipped through the thin navy blue curtain separating premium economy from business class, as if it were a negligible barrier. Back in row 24, Emma watched him go, a sense of unease mixing with her gratitude. She didn't want to be the cause of a bigger scene. She was a woman who avoided confrontation, preferring to win her battles in the quiet, intellectual arenas of debate and scholarship. This public drama, however small, was deeply uncomfortable. A few minutes passed. Then the curtain rustled again. It wasn't Bob. It was a different flight attendant, older with a stern expression and a name tag that read, Margaret Purser. She was followed by a visibly agitated Bethany. Margaret stopped at Emma's row, her arms crossed. Her gaze was cold and accusatory. "Mum," she began, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "We have a report that you and your companion have been harassing a member of my crew." The accusation was so stunningly inverted that for a moment Emma was speechless. Harassing, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. I asked for a glass of water. Bethany has informed me that you became aggressive when your request was denied. After service hours, Margaret continued, her voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to stir and crane their necks. And your companion then became confrontational and left his seat to enter an unauthorized area. Bethany stood behind her superior, her expression a perfect mask of victimhood. It was a masterful, sickening performance. She had reframed her own prejudice and rudeness as a story of a customer's unreasonable demands and aggression. That is a complete misrepresentation of what happened, Emma said, her composure now cracking, replaced by a cold, rising anger. Your flight attendant was dismissive and rude. She lied about policy, and when the gentleman next to me pointed that out, she stormed off. He has gone to speak with someone else, I assume, because she was entirely unreasonable. Margaret's expression didn't soften. Bethany has been with Aura Airlines for 12 years. I trust my crew. We do not tolerate abuse from passengers. I'm going to have to ask you to remain quiet for the remainder of the flight. Any further disruption, and you will be met by security upon our arrival in Paris. The threat was explicit. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Security. The word conjured images of being escorted off the plane of interrogation, of missing her conference. Her entire trip, the culmination of years of work, was being threatened over a glass of water and a flight attendant's lie. The injustice of it was suffocating. She looked around and saw a few sympathetic faces, but more were looking away, not wanting to get involved. The classic bystander effect, a social phenomenon she had lectured on many times, was playing out right in front of her. It was at that precise moment that the curtain parted again. Bob Mercer emerged, and he was not alone. He was walking alongside a man in a pilot's uniform, his jacket adorned with 4 gold stripes, indicating his rank as captain. In Bob's hand were 2 chilled bottles of Fiji water. The captain surveyed the scene in the aisle, the stern-faced purser, the defensive flight attendant, the stunned academic, and his brow furrowed. Bob ignored the flight crew completely. He leaned down and handed one of the bottles to Emma. "My apologies for the delay," he said, his voice calm as if they were sitting in a quiet cafe. "It seems there was some confusion about the plumbing." He then straightened up and looked at Margaret and Bethany. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet intensity in his eyes was more commanding than any shout. "Purser," he said, addressing Margaret, "is it the policy of Aura Airlines to threaten passengers with security for requesting a bottle of water?" Margaret was visibly thrown. The captain's presence had changed the entire dynamic. "So there was a report of harassment against my staff." "I was the one who reported it," the captain interjected, his voice deep and authoritative. Mr. Mercer came to the cockpit to express his concern about the treatment of a passenger. He did not enter an unauthorized area. He asked another crew member to fetch me. "I find it disturbing that in the 10 minutes it took for me to come back here, your response was not to de-escalate or investigate, but to escalate and threaten." He turned his gaze to Bethany, whose face had gone pale. "And you," he said, his voice laced with disappointment. "Is this the level of service you've been trained to provide, lying to customers, refusing a basic amenity, and then fabricating a story of harassment?" Bethany stammered. They were aggressive. I felt threatened." "You felt challenged," Bob Mercer corrected her quietly. "And you didn't like it. So you used your authority and your supervisor's trust as a weapon." The confrontation was stark, laid bare in the aisle. The power had shifted entirely. The purser, Margaret, looked from her subordinate to the captain to the quiet man in the cashmere sweater, realizing she had made a catastrophic miscalculation. She had backed the wrong person, and in doing so had revealed a deep rot within her own crew's culture. The captain took charge. "Margaret, take Bethany to the rear galley. Stay there. We will discuss this on the ground." "My apologies, ma'am," he said, nodding to Emma. "And to you, Mr. Mercer. Please enjoy the rest of your flight. If you need anything at all, you press your call button, and I will personally ensure you are taken care of." With a final withering look at his crew, the captain turned and walked back to the cockpit. Bob sat back down in his seat as if nothing had happened, unscrewing the cap of his own water bottle. The cabin slowly settled, but the air was thick with the aftermath. The story would be whispered from row to row for the rest of the flight. Emma sat clutching the cold, smooth bottle of Fiji water. It felt impossibly heavy in her hands. She looked at the man beside her, who was now calmly reopening his book on the history of the Roman Empire. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine awe and confusion. He smiled a slight, almost sad smile. "Just a man who enjoys history," he said, "and who believes that a person's character is shown not in how they treat their equals, but in how they treat those they believe are beneath them." He paused, looking down at his book. "And I've just learned a great deal about the character of this airline." The rest of the flight passed in a strange, suspended peace. The purser and Bethany did not reappear. A different, younger flight attendant with wide, nervous eyes came by twice to ask Emma and Bob if they needed anything, her service almost reverently attentive. The message had clearly been sent down the chain of command. With the drama subsided, a quiet, more personal atmosphere settled around seat 24B and 24C. The reading lights cast a warm, intimate glow. Emma, no longer able to concentrate on her notes, put them away. "I still can't quite believe what just happened," she said, turning to Bob. "Thank you again. You handled that with... well, I've never seen anything like it." "It shouldn't have needed handling in the first place," he replied, closing his book for good. He seemed ready to talk. "What happened to you was wrong, Emma. It was a small-scale abuse of power, but it's the small abuses that reveal the big problems, like hairline fractures in a foundation." "I'm used to it in a way," Emma confessed, the words tasting bitter. "The little slights, the assumptions. I've learned to navigate them, to let most of them go. But that one, the blatant lie, the threat, that was different. Ignoring it doesn't make it go away. It just empowers the person doing it," Bob said. He looked at her with genuine interest. "You're on your way to a conference. You said a lecture at the Sorbonne," she replied, "on the socio-economic mobility of artisans in pre-revolutionary France." A genuine smile lit up his face. Fascinating. The guild systems versus the emerging merchant class, a constant source of tension. "Did you focus more on the Parisian guilds or the provincial ones in Lyon and Bordeaux?" Emma was taken aback. It wasn't a polite, feigned interest. It was a specific, informed question. Mostly Parisian, she said, her curiosity piqued. Their political influence with the crown gave them a unique position. "You're familiar with the period," a passionate amateur, Bob said, with a self-deprecating wave of his hand. "My work is in a very different field, mostly numbers and projections. History is my escape. It's the story of people, of systems of consequences. It's far more interesting than a balance sheet." They fell into an easy, engrossing conversation. They talked about the fall of Rome, a subject on which he was remarkably well read, and the parallels he saw in modern corporate culture, overexpansion, bureaucratic rot, and a loss of core identity. He listened, truly listened as she spoke about her work, asking insightful questions that showed he wasn't just hearing the words, but understanding the concepts behind them. For Emma, It was a rare and wonderful experience. She was used to men in business suits whose eyes glazed over when she described her research. But Bob, this quiet, unassuming man in a simple sweater, was different. He possessed a sharp, analytical mind that seemed to cut through to the heart of any matter, whether it was 18th century French economics or the flawed customer service model of a 21st century airline. The problem with a company like this, Bob mused, gesturing to the cabin around them, is that the culture has decayed from the inside out. That flight attendant, Bethany, she didn't invent that attitude today. She's been allowed to foster it. Her supervisor, Margaret, didn't just make a bad call. She defaulted to protecting the system instead of the customer. That's a failure of leadership that starts at the very top. The CEO, the board, they're the ones who set the tone. His analysis was so sharp, so clinical, it sounded like he did this for a living. "You sound like you know a lot about business," Emma observed. "I've been around it for a while," he said vaguely. "You learn to spot the patterns: weak leadership, low employee morale, declining customer satisfaction. It's a death spiral. A company can be profitable for years while it's rotting, but eventually the foundation gives way." As the first light of dawn began to streak the sky outside the small window, turning the dark blue to a soft, hazy orange, the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their initial descent into Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport. The spell of their conversation was broken. They began to gather their things, the quiet intimacy of their mid-air bubble giving way to the bustle of arrival. As they stood to deplane, Bob reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out a simple, thick business card. It was cream-colored with a name and a number embossed in plain black font. It read, "Robert Mercer, a phone number." There was no title, no company name, no address, just a name and a number. "Emma," he said, handing it to her. "It was a genuine pleasure meeting you. I hope your lecture is a resounding success. If you ever find yourself in New York and have time for a coffee and a chat about history, I'd enjoy that very much." "I'd like that too, Bob," she said, taking the card. "Thank you for everything. You turned a truly awful experience into, well, something memorable." He simply nodded, a small smile on his lips. They were swept up in the crowd moving toward the exit. They parted ways in the bustling terminal of Charles de Gaulle, he heading toward the private car services, she toward the taxi queue. Holding the card in her hand, Emma felt a sense of mystery. Who was this Bob, the quiet historian and fierce advocate, just a kind, well-off man who happened to be in the right place at the right time, or something more? The question would linger in her mind for the rest of the day. Emma checked into her hotel near the Luxembourg Gardens, the incident on the plane already beginning to feel surreal. After a long, hot shower, she tried to focus on her upcoming lecture. But her mind kept drifting back to the flight to Bethany's, sneer Margaret's threat, and Bob's quiet, unshakable authority. Curiosity finally won. She sat on the edge of her bed, her laptop open, and typed Robert Mercer into the Google search bar. The first result was a Wikipedia page. She clicked it. The photo that loaded was of the man from the plane, perhaps 10 years younger, but unmistakably him wearing a suit and standing at a podium. The first sentence of the article made her stop breathing for a second. Robert Bob Mercer is an American billionaire businessman, investor, and philanthropist. He is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Blackstone Capital, one of the world's largest and most influential private equity firms. Emma scrolled down, her eyes widening. Blackstone Capital? She knew the name. Everyone did. They were corporate titans famous for buying struggling or undervalued companies, restructuring them from the ground up, and either selling them for a massive profit or turning them into industry leaders. They weren't just investors, they were corporate raiders, architects of change, feared and respected in equal measure. The article listed his net worth, a staggering figure with so many commas it looked like a telephone number. It mentioned his philanthropic work, his quiet funding of historical preservation societies, and university research grants. It also mentioned his reputation, a fiercely private, almost reclusive figure, who rarely gave interviews, preferred paper books to tablets, and was known for his razor-sharp intellect and intolerance for incompetence. He didn't run his empire from a flashy skyscraper in Manhattan. He operated from a discreet, unmarked building in Greenwich, Connecticut. He wasn't just Bob. He was that Robert Mercer. The pieces clicked into place with dizzying speed. His unassuming clothes weren't a sign of modesty. They were the privilege of a man who had absolutely nothing to prove. His deep knowledge of history wasn't a hobby. It was the intellectual exercise of a mind that saw the world in terms of systems power and long-term consequences. His calm dissection of Airline's corporate culture wasn't an idle observation. It was a professional diagnosis. Emma leaned back, her mind reeling. The quiet man in seat 24C, the man a flight attendant had dismissed as irrelevant, had the power to buy and sell entire nations' economies. And she had just watched that same flight attendant deny him and his seatmate a simple glass of water. A small, incredulous laugh escaped her lips. The cosmic irony was almost too much to bear. Bethany and Margaret hadn't just insulted a passenger. They had insulted their potential new owner. They had given a master diagnostician a first-hand look at the sickness festering within their company. His final words to her replayed in her mind. "I've just learned a great deal about the character of this airline." It wasn't a throwaway comment. It was a verdict. Meanwhile, in a sterile conference room at Airline's headquarters near Chicago O'Hare, an emergency meeting was taking place. The captain of Flight 88 had filed a scathing report upon landing. The name Robert Mercer had set off alarm bells that went all the way to the C-suite. CEO Mark Thompson, a man with a perpetual tan and an expensive suit, was pacing furiously. "What do you mean you don't know who he is?" He yelled at his head of customer relations. "He's Robert Mercer. He heads Blackstone. They have a market cap larger than the GDP of a small country, and our crew threatened to have him arrested. The internal investigation had been swift and brutal. The audio recordings from the cockpit, a standard procedure for any formal complaint, filed mid-air confirmed the captain's story. Passenger manifests confirmed Mercer's identity. Statements were taken from other passengers in surrounding rows, many of whom corroborated Emma's version of events, painting a damning picture of Bethany's behavior. The purser, Margaret, had been suspended, pending a full review. Bethany had been grounded immediately. The airline's legal team was in a panic. Their stock was already underperforming, fuel costs were up, and they were facing increased competition from budget carriers. The last thing they needed was a public relations nightmare involving one of the most powerful men on Wall Street. Thompson ordered his executive assistant to draft a formal groveling apology to be sent to Mr. Mercer's office. He instructed the legal team to prepare a settlement offer for Dr. Grace, a full refund, a travel voucher for $10,000, anything to make this go away. They were trying to patch a crack. They had no idea that Robert Mercer wasn't interested in a patch. He was interested in the entire foundation. 3 days later, Emma delivered her keynote address at the Sorbonne. She spoke to a packed amphitheater, her voice confident, her arguments precise. She was in her element, the master of her domain. The incident on the plane felt a world away, a bad dream from another life. The lecture was a triumph, met with a standing ovation. That evening, celebrating with her colleagues at a bistro in the Latin Quarter, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number with a US country code. She excused herself and stepped out into the cool Parisian night. Hello, Emma. It's Bob Mercer." The sound of his calm, gravelly voice was a jolt. "Bob," she said, surprised. "Hello. I was just thinking about you. I Googled you." She could almost hear the smile in his voice. "I imagine that was something of a surprise." "To put it mildly," she said. "I feel rather foolish for lecturing you on historical economic models." "Nonsense. It was the highlight of my trip," he said warmly. "But that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling first to see how your lecture went." "It went very well, thank you. A wonderful reception." "I have no doubt," he said. "The second reason I'm calling is about Aura Airlines. Their legal department reached out to me, and I assume they have or will be reaching out to you as well. They have Emma confirmed. They sent an email, a full refund, a rather large voucher, and an apology for the misunderstanding." A misunderstanding, Mercer repeated the word with distaste. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a symptom of a disease. "Emma, I'm going to give you a piece of unsolicited advice. Do not accept their offer. Do not sign anything. Not yet." "Oh," she said, intrigued. "Why is that?" There was a pause on the line. When he spoke again, his voice had a new edge, the sound of the CEO, the investor, the man who moved markets. "Because," he said, "my team at Blackstone has been evaluating the transportation sector for the last 6 months. Aura Airlines has been on our list of potential acquisitions. It's a legacy carrier with good roots, but is poorly managed, deeply in debt, and has a toxic corporate culture, as we both discovered. Its stock is undervalued. After my flight, I had my analysts run a full diagnostic. Their prognosis was not good for Aura's current management." He let that sink in. "The incident on our flight," he continued, "was not the reason I am doing this. But it was the catalyst. It was the data point I needed to confirm what the numbers were telling me. When the people on the front lines feel empowered to be cruel, it means the leadership at the top is rotten. And rot creates opportunity." Emma was stunned into silence. This was happening. It was really happening. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "My job?" he said simply. "I'm calling you as a courtesy. Things might get a bit public in the next few weeks. The story of our flight may come out. I want to assure you that my team will handle it with the utmost discretion regarding your privacy. But I also feel you have a right to be a part of the resolution in a more meaningful way than a travel voucher. A part of the resolution, we'll talk more later. For now, enjoy Paris, and don't sign anything," he repeated. "I have a feeling a much better offer is forthcoming." He hung up. Emma stood on the Parisian sidewalk, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar. The world had tilted on its axis. A glass of water was about to become a billion-dollar tidal wave. The next morning, the financial world woke up to a tremor. A filing with the SEC showed that a shell corporation associated with Blackstone Capital had purchased a 9.9% stake in Aura Airlines over the past 48 hours, just under the threshold that would require a declaration of hostile intent. The message, however, was perfectly clear. Robert Mercer was circling, and he was hungry. For the board of Aura Airlines, the news that Monday morning landed with the force of a physical blow. The SEC filing was an elegant instrument of corporate terror. It detailed in the dry, emotionless language of financial regulation that a holding company named Prometheus Strategic Acquisitions, a known subsidiary of Blackstone Capital, had acquired a 9.9% stake in their airline. The news didn't just appear on their terminals. It exploded simultaneously, igniting every screen on Wall Street. Inside the glass-walled boardroom at Aura's Chicago headquarters, The atmosphere was a volatile mixture of disbelief and panic. CEO Mark Thompson, a man whose leadership style was built on optimistic projections and a firm handshake, tore the printout of the filing in two. "This is a joke. It's a pump-and-dump scheme," he snarled, pacing the length of the polished mahogany table. "Mercer is a phantom. He never does anything this public. He's trying to manipulate the stock, create a panic, and short it on the way down." A few of the younger board members nodded in agreement, eager to believe the simplest explanation. But Philip Carlyle, the oldest member of the board, and a man who had survived 3 recessions and 2 hostile takeovers at other companies, slowly shook his head. "That's not his style," Mark Phillip said, his voice a low, gravelly counterpoint to the CEO's bluster. "Robert Mercer doesn't rattle cages for sport. He's not a gambler. He's an undertaker. He buys things that are already dead or dying, and he doesn't move unless he's certain of the outcome. That 9.9% isn't a threat. It's a death certificate waiting to be signed." Thompson scoffed, but a seed of fear had been planted. He spent the rest of the day in a flurry of activity, a desperate attempt to project strength. He ordered the PR department to issue a statement welcoming Blackstone's vote of confidence in Aura's bright future. He scheduled a softball interview on a friendly business network. Behind the scenes, he instructed his assistant to get Robert Mercer on the phone personally. The call was an exercise in humiliation. He was politely rebuffed by 3 successive layers of assistance before finally being routed to a junior analyst in the mergers and acquisitions department. The young man, who sounded barely out of college, informed him with chilling politeness that Mr. Mercer reviewed all correspondence, but was not taking calls at this time. It was a corporate, shunning a signal that Thompson was no longer considered a peer, but a target. He had been relegated to the position of a nuisance. While Thompson was being stonewalled, Mercer's strategy unfolded with the silent, deadly precision of a submarine. He did not need to issue statements or grant interviews. The financial world did his work for him. On Bloomberg, analysts dissected Aura's crumbling fundamentals, the razor-thin profit margins, the crushing pension liabilities, the aging, fuel-inefficient fleet. On CNBC, a respected aviation consultant highlighted Aura's abysmal rankings in every single customer satisfaction survey for the past 5 years. "This isn't a surprise," the consultant concluded. "Aura has been flying on fumes for years. Mercer is just the first one with the guts to call their bluff." Then on Wednesday, the purely financial narrative was shattered by a human story. A tech blogger from Seattle named Leo Reyes, who had been sitting in seat 23A on Flight 88, had been wrestling with what he saw for days. He'd watched the entire drama unfold, Dr. Grace's quiet dignity, Bethany's escalating hostility, and the calm, commanding presence of the man he now knew to be Robert Mercer. After seeing the financial news, he understood the true magnitude of the event. He wrote a blog post, not for a major outlet, but on his own personal site. He titled it, "I watched a flight attendant deny a woman water and try to bully a billionaire." This is what's wrong with Aura Airlines. He detailed everything with a witness's clarity. He described the racial undertones of Bethany's dismissal of Emma. He quoted Bethany's lie about the first-class service. He recounted Margaret's aggressive threats. The post was raw, personal, and utterly damning. He ended it with a simple line. "A company is what it does when it thinks no one important is watching." The post exploded. Within an hour, it was on the front page of Reddit. By lunchtime, it was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. The hashtags #Das Aura Airlines, #Das Watergate, and #Wasserfly the Unfriendly Skies were everywhere. Major news outlets, seeing the viral traction, picked up the story and amplified it. their journalistic resources confirming Leo's account with other passengers. The story of Flight 88 was no longer a rumor. It was a globally recognized event. The public outcry was a tsunami. Videos emerged of passengers cutting up their Aura loyalty cards. Late-night hosts had a field day, with jokes about the airline's new dehydration class. The carefully constructed corporate image of Aura Airlines, built on decades of advertising, was incinerated in 72 hours. The stock, which had been wavering now, went into a free fall. For Robert Mercer, watching from his quiet office in Greenwich, this was the moment of maximum vulnerability. This was the moment to strike. On Friday morning, Blackstone Capital issued a formal all-cash tender offer to purchase a controlling interest in Aura Airlines. The bid was for $18 per share, a staggering 40% premium over the stock's closing price the previous day. It was a brutally generous offer designed to be irresistible to the shareholders who had just watched their investment get decimated. The offer put Mark Thompson and the board in an impossible position. Their fiduciary duty was to maximize shareholder value. If they rejected such a lucrative offer to protect their own jobs, they would face an avalanche of lawsuits from which they would never recover. They were trapped, and Mercer had built the cage. Their last desperate hope was to find a white knight, a friendly competitor like United or Delta, to swoop in with a better offer and save them. Thompson spent the weekend making frantic calls. The responses were universally polite and unequivocally negative. No rival wanted to take on Aura's massive debt, and certainly no one wanted to enter a bidding war with the notoriously relentless Robert Mercer. They offered Thompson their sympathies, but no one offered him a lifeline. The end came swiftly. One by one, the large institutional investors, the pension funds and mutual funds that owned huge blocks of Aura stock, publicly announced their intention to accept Blackstone's offer. They had lost all faith in current management. Cashing out at a premium was the only logical move. Within 2 weeks, the tender offer was a resounding success. Blackstone Capital had secured over 51% of the shares. The war was over. The day the deal officially closed, a team of Blackstone representatives, led by a severe-looking woman named Julianne Chen, walked into Aura's headquarters. They didn't come to celebrate. They came to begin the autopsy. Mark Thompson was fired via a 1-paragraph letter delivered by courier. The rest of the board received similar notices via email. Their corporate portraits were removed from the lobby wall before they had even finished clearing out their desks. Julianne Chen walked into the now vacant CEO's office. The opulent room with its panoramic view of the runways at O'Hare felt like a tomb. It was a monument to a failed leadership, to a culture that had curdled into arrogance and decay. She didn't sit in the oversized leather chair. She simply stood by the window, watching the planes take off and land. After a long moment, she turned to her assistant. "Get me everything you can on a Dr. Emma Grace at Princeton University," she said, her voice crisp and clear. "And then get her on the phone for me." Emma Grace was in her element, surrounded by the quiet, reverent hush of the Firestone Library at Princeton. She was tracing the lineage of a 17th-century cartographer through dusty municipal records, a task that required the utmost concentration. In this world of ink and parchment, she was a sovereign. Yet for the past few weeks, the outside world had proven to be a relentless distraction. The saga of Aura Airlines was not just financial news anymore. It was a full-blown cultural phenomenon, a modern-day corporate morality play. She'd see the headlines on newsstands, hear the name Robert Mercer whispered by students in the campus coffee shop. It felt deeply strange, like reading about a historical event in which she was named as a primary source. She had received the formal apology letter from Aura's legal team, of course. It was followed by a check for a full refund and a travel voucher so large it was absurd. She had cashed the check but left the voucher untouched, a glossy rectangle of corporate pennants sitting on her desk. She assumed that was the end of it. She had become a footnote in the story of a billionaire's latest acquisition. So when her office phone rang that afternoon, and her departmental secretary told her a Ms. Julianne Chen was on the line from the CEO's office at Airlines, her first instinct was one of weariness. She expected another apology, perhaps an offer of an even bigger voucher to ensure her silence. She was wrong. "Dr. Grace," the voice on the other end began. It was a voice that was accustomed to efficiency and command, yet it held no trace of arrogance. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated competence. "My name is Julianne Chen. I am the acting CEO of Airlines on behalf of Blackstone Capital and Mr. Robert Mercer. I know you've received our formal correspondence, but I'm calling because Mr. Mercer believes that a letter is an insufficient response to what you experienced. Miss Chen, I appreciate the call, but it's really not necessary," Emma began. "Please, if you'll allow me." Julianne interjected her tone, polite but firm. "Mr. Mercer views the incident on Flight 88 not as an anomaly, but as a critical data point that confirmed a systemic cultural rot. In his view, apologizing for a single symptom is meaningless without a sincere commitment to cure the disease. That is why I am calling. We are not offering compensation, Dr. Grace. We are offering you a position." Emma was silent, completely taken aback. "A position I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage. I am a historian." "Precisely," Julianne said, and Emma could almost hear the faint echo of Mercer's own thinking. "Dr. Grace, Mr. Mercer has authorized the creation of a new, fully independent advisory board. It will be called the Aura Board for Ethical Service and Corporate Culture. This board will have executive oversight and the full backing of Blackstone's resources to completely dismantle and rebuild our customer-facing protocols, our employee training, and our conflict resolution systems from the ground up. Mr. Mercer has asked me to formally offer you the position as its first chair." The audacity of the offer was breathtaking. "Ms. Chen, with all due respect, my expertise is in the socio-economic structures of pre-revolutionary France. I consult on museum acquisitions, not corporate training. What could I possibly offer an airline?" "Yesterday, I asked Mr. Mercer the same question," Julianne replied, her voice softening slightly. "I have a roster of the top HR consultants and corporate turnaround specialists in the country." His answer was very clear. He said, "Julianne, we have enough MBAs who know how to read a spreadsheet. They know the cost of everything, but the value of nothing. We need someone who knows how to read power structures." Dr. Grace doesn't just study history. She studies the anatomy of systems, how they are built, how they thrive, and how they decay from the inside. This is an architectural problem, and I want her to be a lead architect. He believes you will see things the business consultants will miss. He wants a humanist, not another capitalist, to rebuild this company's soul. Emma sank into her chair, the ancient manuscript on her desk forgotten. A company's soul. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making an example of a single rude flight attendant. It was about a genuine system-wide resurrection. It was a chance not merely to be a victim of a corporate failure, but to be an integral part of its solution. It was an intellectual and ethical challenge she couldn't possibly refuse. "I am honored," Emma said, her voice steady and clear. "I accept." The changes at the new Airlines began immediately and were relentlessly thorough. Mercer was not interested in cosmetic fixes. He saw the company as a dilapidated historic building. He would not just repaint the facade, he would rip it down to the studs and rebuild it with a sounder foundation. Billions were poured into the company. The old gas-guzzling 767s were retired, replaced with state-of-the-art fuel-efficient Airbus A350s and Boeing 787s. The interiors of the entire existing fleet were gutted and redesigned with more comfortable seating, better lighting, and high-speed Wi-Fi that actually worked. But the real revolution was in the culture. Under the guidance of Dr. Grace's new board, which she populated with not just service experts, but also a behavioral psychologist, a union representative, and an ethicist from a leading university, a new employee charter was created. Pay was increased across the board. The old punitive bonus systems were scrapped. New bonuses were tied to team-based customer satisfaction scores and positive named feedback from passengers. A confidential reporting system was established, encouraging employees to flag systemic issues without fear of reprisal. The centerpiece of the overhaul was the mandatory 4-week training program, known as the Aura Core Curriculum, designed with Emma's direct input. It was an intense, immersive experience. Emma, drawing on her historical knowledge, argued that the problem wasn't a lack of rules, but a lack of a shared professional ethos. The training focused on empathy, active listening, and advanced de-escalation techniques taught by former hostage negotiators. The central case study, analyzed from every possible angle, was the complete transcript and timeline of events from Flight 88. Trainees had to role-play as Emma, as Bethany, as Margaret, as the captain, and even as other passengers, to understand how a single small moment of failed humanity could cascade into a corporate catastrophe. As a matter of policy, the first 2 employees mandated to attend the new curriculum were Margaret, the purser, and Bethany, the flight attendant. For Margaret, a 30-year veteran of the skies, the experience was profoundly humbling. She was confronted in stark and unavoidable terms with her own failure of leadership. She saw how her automatic defense of her subordinate, her refusal to listen, and her quick escalation had been the true point of no return. In the final week, she requested to write a personal letter to Dr. Grace. In it, she wrote, "I spent my career believing my job was to defend my crew. I see now that my job was to defend the standards of the airline itself. I defended the uniform, not the person. For that profound failure of judgment, I am truly sorry." Margaret passed the course, recognizing her deep institutional knowledge, but acknowledging her failure under pressure. Julianne Chen reassigned her to a senior role at the new training academy, where her story became a powerful, real-world lesson for every new purser. Bethany's journey was starkly different. She entered the training with a sullen, defiant anger. She saw the program not as an opportunity for growth, but as a punishment. In role-playing exercises, she was sarcastic and uncooperative. She dismissed the psychological modules as corporate brainwashing and insisted to her trainers that she had followed protocol and was the real victim. Her final review was a damning assessment of a complete unwillingness to adapt to the airline's non-negotiable new standards. She was given a final choice in a formal meeting with HR: fully commit to and retake the training or be terminated for cause. Faced with this final, unappealable decision, she resigned, telling her few remaining friends she was leaving a company that had gone soft. She wasn't fired in a dramatic spectacle. She was simply rendered obsolete, an artifact of a bygone culture that no longer had a place in the new world Robert Mercer was building. 6 months later, Emma Grace was once again on her way to a conference in Europe. She was booked on Aura Airlines Flight 88 in seat 24B. The difference was palpable from the moment she walked down the jet bridge. The air was calm, the crew greeted her with genuine smiles. As she sat down, a young flight attendant approached. "Dr. Grace." "A pleasure to have you with us," he said warmly. "I see from your passenger profile that you prefer Fiji water. I've already got a chilled bottle for you right here. Is there anything else I can get you to make your flight more comfortable before we depart? She smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. No, thank you. This is perfect. A moment later, a man in a simple dark grey pullover settled into seat 24C. He placed a thick biography of Marcus Aurelius on the seatback pocket. It was Robert Mercer. I was hoping I might see you today, he said, his voice the same calm, gravelly tone she remembered. Good to see the new customer preference system is working. Bob, she said, her heart filling with a strange and profound sense of completion. It's good to see you too. This is different. Different is the goal, he said. He looked around the cabin at the attentive crew, at the relaxed faces of the other passengers. He wasn't looking at the new seats or the lighting. He was observing the atmosphere, the product of the new soul they had built together. He leaned back in his seat, a look of deep, quiet satisfaction on his face. Balance sheets tell you the value of a company. He mused more to himself than to her. But the faces of your customers and your crew, that's what tells you its worth. He took a slow breath, the hum of the engines, a steady, reassuring sound. Now, he said quietly, a faint smile touching his lips, this is a company worth owning. That's the incredible story of how a moment of deep disrespect ignited a revolution in corporate accountability. It's a powerful reminder that our actions, no matter how small they seem, can have profound consequences. Dr. Emma Grace wasn't looking for a fight, and Robert Mercer wasn't looking to buy an airline. But injustice has a way of demanding a response. This story isn't just about the spectacular revenge of a billionaire. It's about the idea that dignity is not a premium service. It's a standard amenity. It's about the fact that true power isn't just the ability to acquire things, but the wisdom and character to improve them. If this story moved you, if you believe that decency and respect should be the bedrock of every interaction, then please help us share it. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that matter. What did you think? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.